March 19, 1944, Budapest, Hungary, 6 a.m. While the city slept, while bakers lit their ovens, while mothers tucked blankets around their children, while trams began their early morning routes, German tanks were already crossing the Hungarian border. No declaration of war, no warning sirens, no resistance. By the time most Hungarians woke up that morning, their country was already gone, and the man responsible for what came next wasn't a German. He wasn't born in Hungary. He wasn't even a fascist by conviction, at least not at first. He was a Serbian-born military officer who spent 20 years quietly transforming himself into the most dangerous collaborator in Central Europe. His name was Dome Sztójay, and in the 8 months he held power, he helped murder more than 330,000 innocent people, faster than any other deportation operation in the entire history of the Holocaust. This is not just history, this is a warning. Welcome to World War II Time Tales, the channel that goes beyond the textbooks and into the real, raw, unfiltered history of the Second World War. If you're new here, subscribe right now and ring that notification bell, because what we're about to tell you is the kind of story most people never hear. Let's go. To understand how Hungary fell, you need to understand one extraordinary act of deception. On the evening of March 15, 1944, Hungarian Regent Admiral Miklós Horthy was sitting inside a Budapest opera house, watching a performance of Petőfi when a German embassy official interrupted him mid-show. The message was blunt. Hitler wanted to meet him immediately at Schloss Klesheim, his castle retreat near Salzburg, Austria. Horthy had no idea it was a trap. As the two leaders sat across from each other at Klesheim, Hitler demanding a pro-German government, threatening total occupation. German troops were already quietly marching into Hungary from the west. The entire summit was theater, a distraction, while Horthy argued his country was being taken. When Horthy finally boarded his train back to Budapest on March 18th, German forces moved. By the time his train pulled into Budapest station on the morning of March 19th, Wehrmacht soldiers were waiting for him on the platform. His country was occupied. His prime minister, Miklós Horthy, who had been secretly negotiating peace with the Western allies behind Hitler's back, was gone, dismissed, replaced. Hitler gave Horthy one choice: appoint a new prime minister who would cooperate fully with Nazi Germany, or lose Hungary's last shred of sovereignty entirely. Horthy, a man caught between his nationalist pride and his political paralysis, chose the path he thought was the lesser evil. He chose Dome Sztójay. He was catastrophically wrong. Here is something the history books rarely emphasize. Döme Sztójay was not born Hungarian. He was born Dimitrije Stojaković on January 5, 1883, in the city of Versek, modern-day Vršac in Serbia, into a Serbian Orthodox family. He had no ancestral tie to Hungary, no generations of loyalty, no cultural inheritance to protect. What he had was a cold, calculating ambition, and the intelligence to know which way the wind was blowing. He married a woman named Josefa Landgraf and built his career brick by brick through the military establishment of Austria-Hungary. He fought in the First World War. He served in intelligence. He watched empires crumble and new ones rise. And in 1927, the same year he secured a plum posting as military attaché in Berlin, he did something deeply revealing. He changed his name. The Serbian Dimitrije Stojaković became the Hungarian-sounding Döme Sztójay, an identity swap, a rebrand, a man reinventing himself to climb closer to power. In Berlin, he didn't just observe the Nazi machine. He fell in love with it. By 1935, he was Hungary's full ambassador to Nazi Germany, a post he would hold for 9 years. And by 1942, he had openly declared himself Hungary's foremost proponent of anti-Semitism, not privately, not in whispers, publicly. This was the man Horthy handed the keys to. Sztójay took office on March 22, 1944. What followed was one of the most rapid and total transformations of a country in modern history. Within days, the Arrow Cross Party, Hungary's homegrown Nazi movement, previously banned, was legalized and handed political legitimacy. Labor unions were dissolved overnight. Left-wing politicians were arrested and jailed. Civil liberties that had existed even under Horthy's authoritarian rule were wiped away. Hungary was no longer governed. It was managed like a factory, and the product being manufactured was death. On March 31st, 1944, Sztójay's government issued a decree. Every Jewish person in Hungary aged 6 and older was required to wear a yellow Star of David on their clothing, effective April 5th. 6 years old, children barely old enough to read were being marked, tagged, targeted. In April, Hungarian authorities ordered the 500,000 Jews living outside Budapest to be concentrated into designated cities, makeshift holding zones dressed up as administrative measures. Families were dragged from homes their grandparents had built. Businesses shuttered overnight. Communities that had existed for centuries were dismantled in days. One eyewitness, a Hungarian woman who fled to Switzerland, described the scene in an interview with a Basler newspaper. Thousands were loaded into sealed cattle trains and sent to Poland. Many people witnessed the deportations. The Jews knew the fate in store for them. They knew, and they were loaded onto the trains anyway. What happened between May 15 and July 9, 1944, is almost impossible to process with a rational mind. In just 55 days, Hungarian gendarmerie officials, working hand in glove with Adolf Eichmann's SS deportation units, loaded 437,000 Hungarian Jews onto more than 145 trains bound for Auschwitz-Birkenau. That is nearly 8,000 people per day, every single day, for nearly 2 months. The Anne Frank House records it precisely. The trains brought 3,500 people at a time. Most arrived at Auschwitz and were told to leave their luggage on the platform, that it would be brought to them later. It never was. Of the 437,000 deported, approximately 100,000 were selected for forced labor. With the rest, roughly 330,000 people, were murdered in the gas chambers, most within hours of arriving. The killing was so relentless that Auschwitz Commandant Rudolf Höss reportedly asked Hungarian authorities to slow the transports. Not because he had grown a conscience, because the crematoria were physically overwhelmed. The bodies were arriving faster than they could be burned. The solution was fire pits, trenches dug into the Polish earth, filled with wood and accelerant. Hungarian men, women, and children were shot in the back of the head and thrown into the flames. And when prisoners resisted, when children cried, Nazi guards threw them in alive. 10-year-olds, grandmothers, pregnant women, alive into burning pits. This was the deadliest single period in the entire history of Auschwitz, and it was orchestrated, permitted, unenabled, accelerated by a Serbian-born diplomat who had changed his name and decided that mass murder was a reasonable price for political power. The world was not entirely blind. In April 1944, just weeks before the deportations began, 2 Slovak Jewish prisoners named Rudolf Verba and Alfred Wetzler made a miraculous escape from Auschwitz. They carried with them something priceless, a 32-page report detailing exactly what was happening inside the camp. Gas chambers, crematoria, the systematic murder of human beings on an industrial scale. The Verba-Wetzler report reached Jewish organizations, allied governments, the Vatican, and eventually the deaths of Pope Pius XII and President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. By late June 1944, Roosevelt was publicly threatening military retaliation if Hungary did not stop the deportations. Meanwhile, back in Budapest, Horthy, the man who had appointed Sztójay, was unraveling. He wrote his prime minister a desperate, anguished letter calling the deportations inhuman, stupid, and unworthy of the Hungarian character. He admitted in writing that Hungary had in many cases exceeded even the Germans in brutality. Sztójay's response? He ignored the letter entirely and sped up the transports. On July 2, 1944, Horthy issued an order halting deportations, effective July 7th. But even then, trains kept running for 2 more days. By the time the last transport left, the entire Jewish population of provincial Hungary had been erased. The only Jewish community left in the country was in Budapest. By August 1944, Horthy was done with Sztójay. He demanded his removal. Hitler, for once, eventually yielded and replaced him with General Géza Lakatos. But the damage was permanent. When Soviet forces swept into Hungary and the Arrow Cross seized power in October 1944, Sztójay did what collaborators always do when the regime they served collapses. He ran. He fled west, ahead of the Red Army, carrying whatever he could take. He didn't get far enough. American forces captured him. He was extradited back to Budapest. And on March 22, 1946, exactly 2 years after he took office, the Hungarian People's Tribunal found him guilty of war crimes and sentenced him to death. The man who had declared himself Hungary's foremost anti-Semite, the man who had signed the deportation decrees, the man who had ignored a regent's direct plea to stop the killing, guilty on all counts. August 22, 1946. Budapest. It was a Thursday. In an ordinary late summer morning in a city still scarred by war. Döme Sztójay, born Dimitrios Stojakovich, 63 years old, the man who had reinvented himself 3 times and sold his soul to a genocidal regime, was led to a courtyard and stood before a firing squad. The rifles were raised, the order was given, and the man who had helped engineer the fastest mass deportation in Holocaust history was gone. No ceremony, no mourners, no flowers left at his grave. George Pick, a Budapest survivor who as a 10-year-old boy had watched his neighborhood emptied, would later describe living through the winter of 1944-45 in the Budapest ghetto. On a daily basis, 10 or 15 people died, mainly from lack of food. The bodies were taken out and thrown into a pile in the square. Thousands of dead bodies were frozen solid. That is what Sztójay's 8 months created. That is the world his decisions built. He got a quick death. His victims, 330,000 of them, got the gas chambers. History recorded the difference. Justice, when it finally came, was clean and cold and permanent. There were no tears shed for Dome Sztójay. There never should be. If this story stopped you cold, if it made you angry or sad, or determined that the world must never forget, then you already understand exactly why WWII Time Tales exists. We tell the stories that shaped our world, the ones that happened in the shadows, behind closed doors, in cattle cars crossing frozen plains. We tell them so they are never forgotten. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell icon, and if this video moved you, share it. So put it in front of someone who needs to understand what happens when ordinary people choose power over conscience. Drop a comment below. Did you know about Dome Sztójay before today? We read every single comment, and we'll see you in the next chapter, right here on WWII Time Tales.